I didn't like the way history was taught. My social studies classes, I was so bored, and it wasn't something that really engaged with me. I thought I'm just not a student of history. But then what I discovered is I really am. It's just a visual history. You have to be able to do your job well, even if you think you know everything there is to know, about Impressionism, modern art. Like, you have to be able to deal with an Excel spreadsheet. The reason why the 20th century really has always appealed to me is those two world wars and, what happens during a time where the world is turned upside down, when nothing makes sense, and artists are creating new visual languages to try to understand that. And then you're really kind of analyzing it in a different way, in a formal way, as it's what it is physically made of. And when you break it down in that way, there's no value. I mean, what is it? It's materials, basically. So what creates the value is like, what does it do for you? It's a really competitive field. And it's different. I always compare it with like law. You go into law, you're a first year, then your second year, then everyone kind of advances the same. It does not happen that way here at all. But the best thing you can do is really excel, even if it feels like you're doing something mundane. Prove yourself in your role, in your position, and show your interest.
Hello and welcome to the Career Journey Podcast, No Wrong Choices. I'm Larry Samuels, and I'll be joined in just a moment by Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. This episode features Vanessa Fusco of the world-renowned auction house Christie's. Before we bring her in, please be sure to support the show by liking, following, or subscribing to it wherever you're listening right now. Let's get started. Now joining No Wrong Choices is Vanessa Fusco. Vanessa is the International Director and Head of Impressionist and Modern Art at the world-renowned auction house Christie's. She is based in New York City. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
Did I get all of that right? Was that the correct title? That was relatively long.
That is the title. Got it right.
Yeah. We were actually sent today. Sam sent us the corrected title for you, and he was like, "This is the short version." I'm like, "This is a paragraph long. This is the short version we're talking about here."
It's a multifaceted job, so
for sure.
Well, can you take us through that? So I can run through a title and a list, but nobody can tell us what you do better than you. So, in your own words, who is Vanessa, and what do you do?
Sure. Well, I am the head of the Impressionist and Modern Art department at Christie's in New York. And that means that I cover European art made between roughly 1860s and middle of the 20th century, always in Europe. And what we do at Christie's is we put together sales and advise clients on both buying and selling. It's consignment based. So part of my year is spent convincing clients to sell with Christie's in our auctions. And then part of my year is spent working with buyers, to advise them on acquisitions and whatnot. We do a lot of appraisals. So there's time in between all that where we're helping clients look at the value of their artwork for insurance purposes, for gifting purposes, for moving, paintings within a family. There's a variety of reasons that someone might need to understand the value of their art. And so we do it all. In the process of preparing something to come for sale, there's a lot of research that goes into it. So I oversee a team who craft the provenance. So that's the history of each object. Where has it been? Where has it changed hands? Where has it traveled over the course of its lifetime before coming to an auction or a sale? And we do photography, write the essays, to try to explain what the object is, contextualize it for a buyer, and then value it. So a lot of discussion about what is the right number to put on a work of art, what is going to be the right number to sell it, to part with it, and then for the buyer, what is the right number to acquire it. So, and other things also like catalogs and books. I'm a book editor to part of the year. So I then do exhibition design. So there's a lot that goes into it, but that keeps it fun.
You're hitting on like so many questions that I have right there. That's beautiful. I love it. But to be honest, it sounds like a dream job. So let's start with the dream, right? Let's go back to the beginning. What was the dream? Was there an art moment that you remember from your childhood where you're like forever enthralled with this world and the fascination of the art world? And this is what I want to do for a living? Or was it something else? I want to be a doctor or a lawyer or something else.
I always was interested in art. I grew up in New York City. I went to the amazing museums that we have here as a child. I was lucky enough. I went to like elementary school, a couple of blocks away from the Met, and we would take visits there. And so I think art and culture, just living here, was always ingrained in me. But I really knew nothing about the art world. It's not something that I had familiarity with. It's not, I don't come from a family of collectors. I didn't grow up with art in my home. So, I came to this art world as something of an outsider. I actually went to college with the desire to be a filmmaker. I went to Vassar and I took a art history class there because they're very well known for their art history program. And I just fell in love. While I say I always enjoyed engaging with art, the idea that it could be a profession was very foreign to me. It really wasn't something I had thought about. But in college, I just really enjoyed my art history classes. And then that led to internships and, work experience. And that's really where I discovered a very vibrant career path. But that was mostly nonprofit. So that's mostly was in museum world and small galleries. And the auction house, art as a commodity was something I had even less engagement with, and really something that, when I was in school wasn't taught. You didn't cross. Art was a study. Art was an academic pursuit. And at least the programs that I was in, that's really what it was treated as. And the commercial side was a bit frowned upon. They weren't trying to breed dealers. They were trying to breed curators and, academics. How did I end up at Christie is very randomly. I was out of school and wanted to work in the arts. And I was interviewing, and I interviewed for an entry-level assistant position here in the books and manuscripts department. And again, really, with limited understanding, frankly, of the functions of an auction house. And I also interviewed at the Met. And that was in the ancient Near Eastern department. And both were entry level, get your foot in the door, very administrative work, both out of fields that I really was particularly interested in, that I really knew much about. But I saw it as an entry point. And I was at this crossroads at that time, deciding between the Met and Christie's. And I chose Christie's. And it's just been a marvelous voyage ever since then. I went from the books department to the Impressionist and Modern Art department, which is really, where my interest lay. And then I left for a period to do graduate work, also thinking maybe I wasn't necessarily going to come back. But what I found when I was in graduate school was that I really missed the interaction and the engagement, that I had with people. There's so many passionate people here that are crazy specialized and interested in very niche things. And you have access to all of them, and you're working with them and talking to them all day long. And I missed that, where, in graduate school, the academic felt more like I was in dialogue with a very small group of people who cared about this very specific thing that I was, researching. And it was a lot of time alone, in the library with my thoughts. And it was a great experience, and it taught me a lot. But I went into a PhD program, and I ultimately took a leave of absence from that, feeling like this wasn't as satisfying to me. I wanted to do something more hands-on again with people. And so I came back to Christie's and worked in what was the Museum Services Department, which was really working with nonprofits, so kind of holding on to that academic side. And then I missed the objects. And so I came back into Impressionist and Modern Art as a specialist to work more hands-on with the artwork again. And yeah, it's just been a wonderful trajectory since then, which was in 2014, so 11 years ago.
So you've been in this world for quite a long time at this point. I want to kind of pick up a little bit on that first impression of art. And while you say, obviously, that, maybe there wasn't a great deal of connection between, let's say, as a young child, art, and then seeing that as a career, seeing it as anything else down the line, I would have to assume that something kind of touched you because, as you said, you were not that far away from the Met as a child when you would probably have often be going there with school trips. Was there an artist that you kind of connected with even as a child that you can kind of remember?
Well, yeah, I mean, the artists that I really loved were Italian Baroque. So
Right.
Caravaggio, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the sculptor, was something that I remember just being, and this is through images, this is mostly art in Italy. But like, I remember just being amazed by what Bernini could do with marble, how supple and soft and human-like he could make skin out of such a cold, hard material. And that craft just, I thought was so sensational, and it really got me, and I had to learn more about it. And then I think, that's the technical side of the interest. But then what always has interested me, and what I've always, a lot of my work in college and in graduate school was about, it was how are artists reacting to the times and the moments they live in, right? Because some art feels timeless, some art feels very dated, some art, we look at and we think, I have nothing in common with that. I don't understand it. And so what is the time and place in which something was made, and understanding that context to me is so interesting. It's interesting because when I was in school, I love history, but I didn't like the way history was taught. My social studies classes, I was so bored in them, and it wasn't something that really engaged with me. But then so I thought I'm just not a student of history. But then what I discovered is I really am. It's just a visual history. But you can't really understand objects without understanding what's happening, in the time and place in which they were created, because we're all a product of where we
Absolutely.
The time we live in. Yeah, we're all part of the time we live in. Yeah.
Exactly. And, our cultural output is a reflection of that. So a lot of the work I did, and the reason why the 20th century really has always appealed to me is those two world wars. And, what happens during a time where the world is turned upside down, when nothing makes sense, and artists are creating new visual languages to try to understand that. An old language could no longer be used after World War I. There had to be a new language.
Yep.
So that always really interested me in the way, artists are responding to wars, major cultural shifts, atrocities. It's history through objects.
Right. Because I was going to say that, I went to Fordham University, and I also was a history major there. And while I was not always happy with the way the history courses were taught, I can absolutely, totally sympathize with you about how later in life I've realized now how important those were, because we are all creatures of the time that we live in. And when I entered into the working world, for me, I found out that my history degree really helped because I'm a big sports fan, right? So I understood the time of how sports then resembled the culture, and then obviously how sports in many ways was ahead of the time. Was ahead of times, with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, etc. But not to get off on a tangent there. But you said when you went to school that you saw two things when you were at Vassar. One was the idea of those academics frowning upon the business portion of it, being auction houses, so to speak, and then obviously being happy with, if you want to go a museum route. And in some ways, you're saying that what they said was that some people are art lovers and some are not. Would you consider yourself an art lover?
I'm absolutely an art lover. I don't love all art. I don't love everything I see, but I do love art, and I do love the experience of going to look at art and thinking about art. And I value very much artists and artists' contribution to our life, to our culture. It's less about do you love art or do you not love art? But I think, the discussion of money is, it takes away from art for art's sake. It takes away from the purity of something, because at the end of the day, I'm working with very high net worth individuals, and art is part of a portfolio. Don't want to spend a lot of money on something that they don't feel will hold its value or increase in value. So there is a whole business aspect of it. And I think that's what I felt was a bit more frowned down upon, because then you're judging in a different way. It might be remarkable for its contribution in a canon, but if someone's not willing pay money for it, I'm not really talking about it. So that is where you do see a divergence in interests between the commercial side and the academic side.
I'm really excited to explore, all these wonderful pieces of art that you had a chance to touch and to learn about and discover the amazing people you've met. The one question I want to ask about the beginning of your journey within the world of Christie's, when you had to make the choice, or when you made the choice of entering the world of art and took the path that you did you meet any resistance from the art lovers or the traditionalists like you described before when you made the decision to take this path?
I think resistance is probably the wrong word, but yeah, maybe a little bit of judgment. Certainly when I left my PhD program to work at Christie, I think in undergrad, so many people with art history degrees don't even work in art ultimately. I think that's a little, but once you get to the point of graduate school and, the program I was in, the PhD program. So I think, the expectation was that you're finishing that, you're teaching, or you're going to be a curator. And, I took a different path and I left. And so I think, yeah, a little bit of maybe judgment, maybe disappointment, from
Did you have any hesitation at all?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I felt it was the right thing for me, but like with any decision, one can question it. So yeah, I did have some hesitation, but I realized, I wanted to be back in the workforce and I wanted to be working in a different environment than I was working in. And now looking back on it, I mean, truly, I feel it was the best decision and absolutely the right decision for me at that time. And with everything that's come of it since then, I'm so happy that I made that decision to quit. Basically. I mean, I looked at it as a leave of absence, and I still do to some extent. I have a sort of pipe dream of finishing my PhD higher.
How far into it were you, by the way?
I did a couple of months of classwork. So I had a few years to go. And, what I saw was a lot of my contemporaries who stayed with it getting really hung up in their dissertation, losing interest in their dissertation topic, feeling like, where am I going? What am I doing? And
Right.
I felt it wasn't enough of a passion for me. To me, I feel like maybe it is a retirement project, when my kids are grown, when I hopefully don't need to work anymore, like that for pure interest. But as far as advancing things for myself for a career, I didn't have it in me to keep going with that.
Understood. And we should definitely point out that Christie's is bringing an amazing thing to the world and is an incredible institution. So I want to be clear that they are bringing something really special and magical.
I just want to paint a clear picture of what the path was exactly, though. I mean, I guess I would ask, you said you were going for entry level when you left Vassar and tried to get into this world. Is that still a viable way to get into this field, is to just start from the bottom rung and be diligent and work your way up?
Absolutely. You prove what you can do in your role. And I manage a lot of people. I mentor a lot of people now. I work with many people just starting out in their careers. And I think that is my advice always. Take your job and do it well. And I think it's hard. It's a different generation now also that I'm working with, who are starting out. And I see a lot of desire for movement, forward movement, expectations. I've done this a certain amount of time, therefore I should be advancing.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
My world is not that way. There's a limited pool of jobs. You have to be patient. You have to be diligent. You have to really, because there's also a million people ready to do your job. It's a really competitive field. And it's different. I always compare it with like law. You go into law, you're a first year, then your second year, then everyone kind of advances the same. It does not happen that way here at all. But the best thing you can do is really excel, even if it feels like you're doing something mundane. Prove yourself in your role and your position and show your interest, because there's always room to expand. When I was a coordinator, back then it was called administrator, I asked to write essays for the catalogs. I wanted to do sort of extracurricular work, learn more, learn about the objects, show your interest. But, you have to be able to do your job well, even if you think you know everything there is to know, about Impressionist and modern art. Like, you have to be able to deal with an Excel spreadsheet. It's building blocks.
The basics, for sure. You mentioned a moment ago about yourself becoming a mentor to people. And we always talk about it here on the show is that mentors need mentors. So, who was your greatest mentor?
That's a good question. I've had a number of great mentors over the years, and managers that, as I changed roles, kind of stayed as mentors.
Are they one and the same? Like, is a mentor a manager? Is a manager a mentor?
No, I think you don't really want a mentor to be your direct manager. Right. I think they're not one and the same, because also a mentor is somebody that you want to be able to go to with a problem, with a challenge maybe that you wouldn't want to share with your direct manager. Yeah. So I don't think they're necessarily one and the same. They can be, but it's hard to be a really good manager, is the truth. It really is. But I've benefited from some very good managers and from some not so great managers over the years. And, that's how you kind of take a little bit and understand what is your own style and, what you could have benefited from having over the course of your career, and then try to give that back as you're working with, the next generation.
We're going to keep hitting the career journey path, but at this moment, I just feel like I need to ask, can you describe what it's like to have the access that you have, come in close contact with these amazing pieces of artwork and see them up close, and the feeling you get, what eyes have seen that particular piece of work, what eyes have touched that particular piece of work, and just the awe that you have? I mean, I get it. Like, I collect coins and stuff, and sometimes I get it with currency, right? Like a Roman coin or something. Like, that's so cool. I mean, can you put into words like what it's like to just have this access?
It's pretty awe-inspiring, but it's also very humbling. And a lot of the things that I see and that I work with, its presence in a sale is a moment in time that might not happen again for many years. And so that can be coming out of private collections where they've been for generations. So unseen. Not everybody wants to lend to an exhibition, even if the picture has been requested by every museum across the world. Some families just don't do it. So, you can see things that have been hanging in a home, enjoyed by a small group of people for multiple generations, and then it comes out. I mean, we have exhibitions, they're open to the public. What we write about a work will become part of that work's history. The research that we do, what we say about it, it becomes definite. That's a description that's going to follow this picture forever. Hopefully we get it all right. That's our goal.
Yeah.
But we see these things, we show these things, people can come. It is technically open to the public. It's not something that's advertised, so you don't see hordes of individuals coming the way people come to museums, but technically one could. And then these are works that might leave the country, might not be seen for another multiple generations. This could be the only time in 200 or 300 years that this object is exhibited. So that kind of access is remarkable, and it is very awe-inspiring. But then, like anything, it's also a physical object, and part of our description of it, part of our making sure that we're selling it correctly is describing what it is. And you have to think past this sort of art historical narrative about it and get past that awe and look at it as paint on canvas or bronze with patination. And is it perfectly preserved? Probably not, with historical works. So what has happened to it over time? And then you're really kind of analyzing it in a different way, in a formal way, as it's what it is physically made of. And when you break it down in that way, there's no value. I mean, what is it? It's materials, basically. So what creates the value is what does it do for you? It's really wonderful and really interesting.
Shay's question kind of evoked this image in me of you walking into this home and, there's, this beautiful, let's say, Monet on the wall, something along those lines. But it's it's over their TV set. Seeing something like that, or someone's got this priceless vase and it's used to hold umbrellas.
Aww,
so
really?
So I'm just picturing this is what it's yes, this vase could be worth $7 million, but we've been using it for decades to hold the umbrellas for everyone who comes into the house. So
functional.
That to me kind of blows my mind.
It's a thing in somebody's home.
We use it to prop the door open when to let the breeze in.
All sorts of crazy things, household cleaners applied to sculptures being cleaned as if it's
oh my God, it's
a table, paintings in truly ridiculous, but in the bathroom, it's, yeah. And there are some people who are really invested in being, good stewards of the material and see it as they're just holding on to something for a short period, but they have the kind of like understanding of the importance of preserving it. And then some people who don't, they've inherited it or they don't know what they have. It's just something that's always been around that they never thought much about. There's the gamut of all of these types of individuals. So yeah, you see some really crazy installations, definitely.
Do you remember the first unbelievable piece of art that you had access to as a young person coming up? What was that holy cow moment? Like, I can't believe I'm standing and holding this.
And where was it? Was it in the bathroom? I can't believe this Jackson Pollock's in the bathroom.
My first year in the Impressionist and Modern Art department, Christie's sold works by Gustav Klimt that were restituted to the heirs of Adele Bloch-Bauer. And that was really, that was amazing because that was my first, I was very early in my career. I wasn't ever holding the art, the paintings, but like, I remember, thinking that like, this is, first of all, the history of the objects and also the quality, the fact that these were museum pictures and hence they are in a museum really amazed me. And look, 90% what we sell is not of that level. It's a variety and there's many sub-markets in this larger art market, but that really blew me away as a sort of early first experience.
I read that an auction is basically a show. Right? You're putting on a show is what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. Theater. Yeah, exactly. You have to keep interest and you're hyping it up and you're getting people interested and excited and that whole thing. But that takes an army. So you started kind of on the ground floor. What were the positions that you started with and how did you work your way up that ladder to the esteemed position that you are with now? Do you remember the moments of promotion? Or who you talked to or who gave you that opportunity?
Yeah, I do. I remember very well. I remember all of those moments. And I think, when you think of the production of the auction, there's so much that goes into it that is a back end, that is even divorced from the art. I'm on the specialist team, right? So I work with the artwork, but there's marketing, there's shipping, the logistics, there's the exhibition design, the hang.
I just want to say shipping, by the way, like I've worked in fields where it's not a work of art. And if you don't get that right in this world, that's a problem.
Yeah. That's a real problem.
I mean, and also what we do, is truly like move mountains in advance of an auction. In some cases for the top end pieces, we're sending these works all over the world. And so, you need to have the right team in place, not only to transport them, but then in the location that you're sending it to. So a lot of the job is also talking with my colleagues in Hong Kong, in Taipei, in London, in Paris, wherever we're sending the works to prepare them and make sure they understand, what they have, and sometimes it's going and sometimes it's accompanying. We send specialists from New York onto the tours as well. But yeah, that movement is so important. And that in itself, it's global. You're transcending cultures, you're transcending ways of working.
Sure. Temperature,
humidity, climates. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's such a big production. And, auctioneering in itself is not something I do, but that is such a art and such an extraordinary craft. So it really is a team. It's a big team that works together to get this all live. And as far as myself and my own moments of promotion, yes, I remember the decision to leave Christie's to go to graduate school, which was a hard decision because I loved the team and I loved what I was doing. But I was early in my career. I was here 3 years out of college, and it was really my first series of jobs. And I saw a lot of people had graduate degrees, and I didn't want to have my resume thrown out for not having that. And I had an interest, I had learned now on the job. I understood the art world in a more concrete way than I did when it was much more abstract, before I entered it. And so I wanted to keep going and I wanted to do more. And I left again, not necessarily thinking I would come back. But then when I decided to come back, I remember, the woman who I worked with in museum services who gave me a huge amount of latitude, a huge amount of freedom, really trusted me, and I really trusted her. And we had a great sort of working rapport. I was called an account manager, so it was a little more of it wasn't administrative. You're still in a support kind of function. And I liked that job a lot because I traveled all over the US and saw all the museums, like all the museums in the country, the small, the regional, and it was amazing to see what's been collected where throughout America and sort of the history of collecting in America. And I created a role for myself in that team as the associate director eventually of that department. And it was not something, it wasn't something that existed, but I was outgrowing the account manager. And there were a few titles in between account manager and associate director. But, I pushed the limits and it was sort of like, I want to do more and here's what I want to do. And I think what I'm doing warrants this title. And, bless her, she gave it to me. She fought for me to have it. And this is a pretty big organization and it's pretty bureaucratic, but she really believed in me and fought for that. So that was definitely a moment that I remember. And then I came back into the Impressionist and Modern Art department because I learned a lot about how to work with the clients and how to run business, but I really missed being more connected to the art. And so I wanted to get back with the art in a more hands-on way.
I could hear so much ambition there. So I know that's like a vital part of how you were able to get to that next point in your life. We were talking before we came on here about you're fluent in Italian, you dabble in other languages. Is language a part of what has set you apart, that you're able to speak fluent Italian? And what are those other qualities that kind of set you apart and allowed you to get up that ladder and move in that career journey?
Look, I think language for art is really important. In graduate school, you have to pass German, reading comprehension, and at least one other Romance language. And the art world's very international. And for what I do with European art, I couldn't get away with just speaking English. So I think, yes, I think that's a benefit. I think some cultural fluidity is also important because, you're working with people from all over the world. So you have to have a little bit of a camouflage aspect in that way, I guess. So yeah, I think that was important. And otherwise, I've just genuinely been very interested and passionate about this material. And I think, with clients that I work with, I think they appreciate the knowledge. I work with a lot of clients who come with a financial background and, I have to converse with them. I have to talk their language, but I don't pretend that is my forte because it's not. I came to this not as a trader, not as a finance, but not looking at art as commodity, but coming from the academic background and then learning the financial part of it. And I think that works for some clients and for others, they want someone who's more like, this is going to have a 6% return on investment year over year. That's not my style. That's not my thing. And I also think it's impossible to really say that. So yeah, I think that kind of real passion and knowledge, it's what I want to lead with. It's what I ask my team to lead with. And again, I think you see this a lot as we discussed of, wanting to move forward, this idea to move forward. And I really believe you need, at the time you're standing in front of a client and you get that opportunity, you really better know what you're talking about. So
right.
These are people who are really excelling in all of their various fields. Don't bullshit them. Get the knowledge, build it up through the library, build it up through spending time in the warehouse, build it up through being with the artwork so that when you finally are put in front of them, you really can believe in your own expertise. I mean, that's what it's expertise. That's what sets you apart. There's a million art advisors. There's a million people, willing to help you make an art collection. So to me, it's all expertise. There's nothing else. There's nothing else to hold your hat on.
Larry Shea said before that he's a collector. I have to admit, I'm a collector of, I've been a longtime collector of comic books. And I know that as a collector, the most basic idea is that rarity dictates price in a great deal of the sense there. And obviously we're dealing with, whether it be, a Chagall or things of that nature. They didn't make, he didn't make 50 copies of a specific painting. He made one. So by definition, it's extremely rare. So what are the factors that go into determining numbers behind the value of a painting? We've had a couple of artists on this show who talked about, hey, this is the amount of time I've spent on a specific painting, therefore I believe it's worth X amount of dollars. So then what are the factors that go into, what makes $100 million painting $100 million?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's definitely rarity is a big part of that. Quality, and the benefit I have, I don't work with living artists. I work with artists
Sure.
whose work is complete. So I can look at it in its entirety and nothing else is being made. So nothing is going to be added to this. And in fact, to take that a further level, things are only going to be taken away because works get donated to museums. It's actually diminishing supply because nothing else being produced. So the rarity and the quality, where does that work sit within an artist's body of work? Freshness. So the provenance, again, the market loves something that's a discovery that has been in a private collection, buried for decades, unseen, unknown, versus something that has, 4 years ago was seen on the dealer's booth at Basel and then was subsequently, traded hands 2 years ago. The more things trade hands, you can't really quantify it, but the more something has traded hands in a way, the less desirable it is. You wonder, how come nobody's really living with
keeping it, right?
So that provenance and that freshness is really important. Condition, some things that are wonderful works of art, but they're a wreck. They've
been holding the door open.
they had a bad conservation project, a bad conservation job done to it 50 years ago when conservation practices were very different. Paintings conservation it's relatively new phenomenon. And there's a lot of things that were done in like the 50s and 60s that you would never do now. Did they have an intervention that has kind of irreparably damaged the value of the picture? And then, we do rely upon comparables because even though everything I don't do prints, I don't do multiples, everything bronzes are edition pieces. So, but paintings, drawings, it's all unique works of art, but there's comparables. So, like take Monet worked in series. So, there's certain series, Haystacks, the Nymphaeas, these are the top end. There's other series, that are lesser value. So you're still working within a range of values for any given type of object. And then it really, so you're looking at comparables, but the way we train, it really is like a muscle, the pricing muscle. So you're wanting to develop a gut feeling where, yes, you then, you double check, you look, you see, what else has sold at what prices, but you're really trying to gain like a reflex to be able to assess a work of art and put a value on it. So those are all of the factors that come into play. And
where do the works
artists, sorry, Larry, the artists, like,
Yeah, sure,
some artists are just worth more than others, period.
Right. Where do you find the works of art? I imagine some people bring things forward. Do you try to secure things and do you seek things out?
You do.
How Antique Roadshow is it? I mean, that's kind of got to be the question, right?
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing about working somewhere like Christie's is the power of the brand. So, everybody knows Christie's. Everybody knows Christie's and Sotheby's, and if you have a valuable work of art, you are going to usually make at least those 2 phone calls. And this is, excluding dealers and advice, but for the auction route, you're going to make those 2 phone calls. So because of the power of the brand, there is a lot of reaction. It's a little morbid, but the times in which somebody is selling, it's the sort of fundamentals of the business are the 3 Ds, which is death and debt and divorce. So those are the times that people need to sell their artwork.
Wow.
Rough times.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you're also in therapy, and you have spent
Yeah.
So
several
you're
other
not dealing with
specialties
people
as
at the
well.
best part of their lives, for sure.
Nobody does it to just share it with the world.
Mediation, arbitration.
I mean, it's not glamorous, but, and then I should add, there can be a bit of a 7-year itch with artwork also, people just want to redo. I've been living with something, I'm getting tired of it. But a lot of, at least for my field, a lot of it is estates. And, the next generation often can't live with everything because they have that estate tax to pay. And also, what do you divide among siblings? You can't divide an object, you can divide money. And it keeps it a little easier. It keeps things equitable. So a lot comes to us. But then, there's a lot that we do proactively also. And that's part of working with clients, the buying side. I have someone who is looking for X. Let me go out and find it and make that match. Try to convince somebody to sell because I have a buyer for it. So I'd say it's probably maybe 70% reactive, 30% proactive. But that's also because, we're lucky people call us.
While we're at this particular bus stop, it seems like a good time to ask the cast of characters that you must deal with on a day-to-day basis. No names. You don't have to name any names.
It would be cool, though.
Right. I mean, you must have story after story of dealing with individuals both inside the auction world and outside, that are selling or what have you, or purchasing. You must have a cast of characters story or two.
There's a lot of really fascinating and eccentric personalities. And that is both, people I work with and also, internally and externally with the clients. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories.
Some stones are best left unturned.
Absolutely left unturned.
Knowing
Fair
that
enough.
you can't tell those stories, I'm curious, have you ever dealt with a fraud? Has anybody ever brought something forward that was not real that you eventually uncovered along the way?
Frequently. I'd say, ma'am, we look at least one fake work every day. I mean, we get sent.
Wow.
Every day?
There's a lot of.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of it doesn't. You hit delete. It's pretty clear. But there's a lot of fakes. There's a lot of fakes. There's a lot of forgeries out there. It just is what it is. Again, a lot of it is very poorly done. I think also with a lot of modern art, you hear sometimes people are like, oh, I could do that. You can't. And when you try to, you have to be very apparent that you
I say
can't.
that all the time. Matisse, I got that. I can do that.
But you don't. And it is it's the same muscle. You just know. You know. Do things get by? Of course. And there is there's a formal authentication process for a lot of the artwork that I handle, but we're pretty good first guard that we're not going to even put something through that process that we don't believe in. But you see fake stamps, fake stickers, fake exhibition labels, fake provenance, and then some things that are just copies. So, you say, no, that's actually, the MFA Boston. So I know you don't have it.
Right.
But yeah, people send a lot of things that are not real.
It's a great question, though. There's so many other things we want to get to. There's a billion things here, but I think I want to know at this point, have you caught the bug? Have you ever gone to an auction? Do you have a collection yourself? Are you seeking pieces?
How many Monets do you have on the wall?
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Yeah, well, art. So I do have a collection, but it's mostly artists that I know. So my husband is a painter. That's a hobby mostly, but we have a lot of friends who are artists, and so. For us, the artwork that we have is very personal. We know most of the artists. I wish I had Monets, but also I know I'm not in a position in my life right now to steward them appropriately because I have a 6-year-old and a 14-month-old. So like they're going to get nowhere near.
Right.
No,
you
no
know,
Monets on the wall.
if I could afford it, but you know,
Little spaghetti sauce over
exactly.
there, some peanut
That's
butter
right.
up there.
I will
That's right.
not put
That's
anything
right.
through that. And yes, I have, I have caught the bug. I love looking and discovering, little things like in auctions. I don't really bid on them because again, I don't feel like I'm in a good place in my life to bring valuable things into my home. But, the art that we have is all very personal and a lot of my husband's work also.
Let's get back to the, a day in the life kind of thing. Like, is there a typical day/week that they're all different? I could see you shaking your head already. Like, nope, they're all unique.
Anybody who works here that you ask that question to will say the same thing. You think you know what your day holds, and then you don't, because you can get that phone call that just like changes everything, and that can be coming from a client who you never thought would sell their X, and all of a sudden they want to talk about it. And you're not
Right.
prepared. You have no foresight for that. And there you are having that discussion.
You mentioned Sotheby's. Is it competitive? Like when
Extremely.
that happens? Is it like Clash of the Titans? Like, I'll come in at this number and I'll give you a minimum of this. And okay,
it's you're pitching your services, and of course that's about the price, because again the pricing is set by us, right? It's by the experts. Like, what do we think we can sell this for? And so everyone wants to hear a higher price. Not always the right move, but everybody wants to hear a higher
And
price.
lower commission.
And look, right,
Yeah.
and we want to charge more. So then it's about, how much do we believe in it? How much do we want it?
do you guarantee a minimum?
We do. Either Christie's does, or we contract with third parties to do that. And so I'd say, that's of interest for some sellers and not all, because you're guaranteed a minimum, but in an exchange for that kind of insurance policy, you have to give up a portion of the upside.
Sure.
So, it depends on how risk averse you are. Some people are gamblers. Some people want to play. Some people want, say, I believe in my work, put it in naked, unbacked. I'll even take a lower estimate because I know it's going to do so well. And then
Welcome to the show.
and then others want an insurance policy, and some want a high price that's unachievable, and we walk away and say, we just don't think we can do this for you.
You mentioned a moment ago about the how are these collections come into your house. Is that the case that your day-to-day, or not mean your day-to-day, but your Rolodex is essentially people you essentially deal with all the time, whether they be brokers or collectors? It just can't simply be like the random family that comes in and says, hey, I've got a garage full of, unbelievably valuable paintings. I mean, there must be an ecosystem.
Yeah, there is very much an ecosystem, and it's a big team. It's a big international team, and we work together and we communicate together so that we are delivering the best service, to our clients worldwide. That said, sometimes there are randoms. It happens, but for the most part, things are very, the people in the art world, the people who we know have art, are very well covered. And you want to be engaging with them. Of course, a natural time to do so is during the sales, because you are, you invite into the exhibition, even if you're not buying or selling this season. If you love art, you love coming to see. So it's an upkeep of a relationship, is a huge part. It's historically really a relationship driven business. You want to make sure that you're in a position to get that call. You often will have to compete for it, but if you have the right relationship with the seller or the buyer, you can do more for the clients.
How do you envision your role in all of this? I mean, obviously you have the academic background where, there's the idea of arts for art's sake, but you're also obviously on the other side of that where art is a commodity. There is a price to it. Is it more that you are someone who wants to deal more with the idea of art for art's sake, or is it that, you do have a business to run.
Well, there's definitely a business to run. I couldn't exist in a world of art for art's sake doing what I do. And so for me, it's really, when I'm working with sellers, I really want to get the most money possible for them. And, with buyers, you want to make sure they're paying a fair price, but what an object might be worth to one person and to another person can be different, right? Based on their needs and based on what they want. And, some people have been looking for the thing for so long and never found the thing, right? And then when they have it, like, they're willing to pay more for it than somebody who just comes in and is like, yeah, I like it. Oh, that would fit perfectly in my bathroom. Like,
I can use the prop the door open, right?
So there's different needs, but fundamentally you want to make sure that you're leading with integrity, right? And like, for me, there's not any single transaction that would be worth undermining the integrity, because these are long lasting relationships, and whatever I will get out of a transaction, if it's undoing a relationship, it will never be worth it.
I'm curious about rights to different works of art. Before I asked about authentication and validation of things, ownership. Do people bring works of art forward that they do not have the rights to, or do not have the ownership history with? Like, I think about World War II, for example, and so many pieces of art that were taken from people's homes and people's families and were distributed all throughout the world. How do you verify ownership of a piece of art?
So current ownership and historical ownership, right? Two different things. So current ownership, there are rights and warranties that somebody has to give, when they sign a contract with us. Ultimately, like, if you can produce the picture, that's a good sign. Things get filtered through the art loss registry, right? So to make sure that we're not dealing with anything that's stolen. And it does happen that we're sent things that people are prospecting, or, every now and then, you'll even get the feeling like this picture was taken at a party and somebody's like asking for a value and they don't really own it. So you have to use your judgment. You have to talk to people who you're working with, and you can figure it out. You can figure it out pretty easily when somebody is in control or not. And it's experience, right? If it feels right or doesn't feel right. Historical ownership is a whole other big topic, because somebody could own something today that was taken, you take the case of Nazis, like, was taken from a previous owner unlawfully. And, but that doesn't mean that the person who owns it today doesn't own it, but there is going to be work to do, right? There's going to be a reckoning to be had. So and this is something you see a lot in my field because of the time that the works were produced and, what they lived through. So that's why being able to delineate and be clear about the wartime provenance is really important, and there's certain artists that the Nazis took, right? There's a lot of artists that were just collected by Jewish families in Germany and Austria. And those are, you have to be extra careful when you're looking at those artists and make sure that you really are able to understand the wartime provenance. But it's hard, it can be like looking for a needle in a haystack sometimes. So it's a lot of work, and we'll hold things out of a sale so that we can do that work and make sure that when we do present to the world that we can pass on a clear title.
Great answer. No Wrong Choices is a show about chasing your dreams. And that's kind of how we started this whole conversation. So I have to ask you, are you living the dream right now? Like, it feels like you're at the pinnacle of your career.
Yeah, like your job seems so super glamorous.
Like, where else is there any place to go up for you? Because I feel like you're at the pinnacle. Like,
no, there certainly is. There's many levels above me at Christie's, but I'm very interested in my work, and Yeah,
That's evident.
I do.
The smile is clear.
I do love my job. Look, am I doing exactly what I want to be doing every moment of every day? Of course not. There's aspects of my job that I find totally boring that I don't want to do and that don't like, intrigue me. And there's the mundane for any work. But fundamentally, I really do like what I do. And, it keeps me going. It keeps me going. As I mentioned, I have young kids. Like it's hard. It's hard right now, but I don't want to sacrifice this that I've worked so hard to build. And I'm at a position, at least having been here for so long, where I can find my balance and make sure that I'm able to do both. Am I doing both as well as I could and want to? Probably not, but something's got to give, and so I make sure I can stay balanced with that. But ultimately, what I feel is on the other side, when they're older and when I still have this, is going to be amazing and keep me going.
Before we let you go, and I know we got to let you go. We were looking at the Christie's website before we got on, myself and Larry Samuels, and I noticed that it recently had sold a vase that Picasso had painted on, which sold for a little over $500,000. And it just seems to me like that seems like so cheap.
It's a bargain.
So I was joking with like $500,000. I'd buy two of them, for God's sake. You're kidding me with that. How does that happen? My God.
Well, so those vases are additions, so they're not unique, right? So
Okay.
Picasso himself did not paint them. They were based on Picasso's designs.
They're not even real. Picasso selling for $500,000? That's a rip-off.
But, the vase, the vase you might be speaking about, actually, it's something that came to mind. I don't know if it's this one or not, but I'll say I did have an experience with a vase where when we examined it and went to look inside it, there were pistachio shells.
Absolutely. I'd pay $500,000 for that.
Well, that's perfect.
for Pablo Picasso's pistachio
It's a
shells.
functional thing that someone at a party put pistachio shells.
Great.
That is very, very
They
funny.
used it to prop the door open. There you go.
So, Vanessa, final question before we let you go. A young person who wants to enter this world, who looks and sees Vanessa and says, I want to be her someday. What advice do you have for somebody who's starting out in this world?
Take any job where you can prove yourself, because especially here, it's getting the foot in the door, right? And once you're here and you can show that you are hardworking, that you're diligent, that you're thoughtful, creative, I really believe like there are many paths. And I think that's it. Do your job well, rather than, of course you want to have ambition, you want to have objectives, you want to have dreams, but I really believe in the building blocks. And I really believe that you're not going to get that step unless you can excel in what you're doing. So take what you've been given and excel in it. Take whatever you have and really do it, because that is going to give people the belief. That's going to make you grow, and you're always learning. That's the thing. You have access to this world. You're learning, even if it seems like maybe you're not doing the exact thing that you want to do. Learn from it. And I think, having that curiosity and that drive, to me, it's like you can't teach that. You can teach a lot about the role, any role, right? You can teach the role, but you can't teach that kind of fundamental drive and that understanding.
Well, that is great advice, and you clearly have lived that, because what you have achieved is quite remarkable and absolutely fascinating. For our listeners out there, I've known Vanessa for a little bit, and I discovered what she does for a living not that long ago, and I immediately said I have to find a way to get her on this program. So, Vanessa, thank you for finally breaking down and joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation.
So that was Vanessa Fusco of Christie's, who so generously and graciously agreed to come on the program with us today. Tushar, what are your key takeaways?
My one big takeaway is how many questions I had left to ask this woman. I mean, my God, the amount of questions that we left on the table are amazing. We could have spoken to her for another hour.
Let's go for part two.
Such a fascinating conversation. It really is a mysterious world for all of us, right? I mean, we just kind of see the end result of any time we see these auctions when they're for big dollars, etc. So you've always got to wonder, like, what does it mean to be that person who's kind of in it all the time? And I was very surprised by the fact that, she understands her role within this world, right? She's part art lover, but also part business person, because that's where she kind of stands on that fence line there, which is, she is not an academic, but she understands the academics who kind of turn their nose up to this world. But at the same time, without the sale of these paintings, in many cases, people would never know that they exist. People would never know that these types of works of truly timeless art are out there, and that it's the glamour to it that sometimes is so wonderful. She has a glamorous life. Let's be honest. She's got a really cool job. And when you said, hey, Sam, at the end of it, a piece of advice for someone who's young and wants to get in the industry. What about someone who's 53 years old and wants to get in the industry? Come on. Somehow I can't make a change as well. Great. I would love to be part of that, right? And it's timeless for a couple of reasons. One is that, you don't simply have to be a lover of art, because I think at the end of it, it's also about being the idea of a collector, right? Shay, you talked about it. You're a coin collector. I'm a comic book collector. So I understand that notion of, there's a certain amount of real awesome gamesmanship to the hunt of finding things, to the hunt of finding the provenance behind things. And then also, you want to have cool stuff in your collection at the end of the day. I think that is just an unbelievably cool job, and to kind of pull the veil off that a little bit, I was really, really enthralled by the whole conversation.
Yeah, those are great points, T. Not to be too generic, but I mean, it's quite simple. Do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I mean,
don't we say that all the time?
I mean, but you could just hear her passion and her joy when she was talking about what she does for a living. And it shows, and I'm sure it's displayed in the way she does her job as well. And I was really struck by her advice stuff, and I always am. I always try to really dig into that advice, because I think that's the important thread of this show. She talked about getting in the door, and do the job, right? If you're going to get the front desk job, be the best front desk person there, the person who has all the answers. You're filing, read the files, learn something. When I started working for Steely Dan, a million years ago, it was my first job out of college. That's what I did. And it was as simple as learn how to answer the phones properly. What do I say? What do I not say? How do I say this person's here, or do I just be vague? If I'm going to clean the bathroom, and I mean it, people, make it sparkle, man, because if you're going to do the job, the only way you're going to graduate to that next job is if you do it with joy, do it with ease, and do it with perfection. And that's what life is all about. And be a joy to work with. We talk about that all the time, too. Yeah, who wouldn't want to work with Vanessa after this interview? I mean, she's a delight. So, just be a good person, do the job, and do it with conviction. And I think that's great advice.
It reminds me a great deal of a book I read years ago. Another one of these, timeless business books written by Pat Riley, actually, The Winner Within. Right, where the line in the book is never demean your time in the trenches, and that's really what her basic advice is. Right, never demean your time in the trenches. And you said it yourself. If you're going to get coffee for people, oh my God, be the best person out there who gets coffee for everybody, knows what everyone wants, etc. You want to be, you're going to file papers for the day. Well, learn whatever the hell you can about the business that you're in. I mean, part of it is and she's right. You are responsible for your own career in many senses, right? No one's going to make you, no one's going to promote you just because they think you're good at, just because they like you, right? You've got to be at least showing a certain amount of aptitude for what you're doing, and that is work ethic from within.
For sure. The phrase that I was thinking of as she was talking about that is the cream always rises to the top. And I've managed many teams in my lifetime and run companies, and you can always tell who that special person is, or who those special people are, that one way or another are going to find a way to make it up the ranks and really be stars. And it's from within. It's a passion, it's a drive, it's a way of being, it's a way of life. And I thought that was very interesting advice. Another key takeaway for me was being a product of your environment, growing up in New York City and having access to all of these museums and all of this culture, and that's where I am talking to you all from right now, is something really extraordinary and really special. And she had the opportunity to take advantage of all of those things. And clearly, it showed her a world that many other people might not see. And she wrapped her arms around it and created a path that, again, is truly extraordinary. So, Vanessa, thank you again for joining us on this episode of No Wrong Choices. We also thank you for joining us. If this episode inspired you to think of somebody who could be a great guest, please let us know via the contact page of our website, which can be found at norongchoices.com. Be sure to check out our blog with takeaways from each episode while you're there. We also ask that you support the show by following us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, X, and Threads. On behalf of Larry Shea, Tushar Saxena, and me, Larry Samuels, thank you again for joining us.